You know, in any office, there are two social dynamics that get people talking more than anything else: office romance and sexual harassment. For the longest time, we've treated them as polar opposites. But what if they're not? What if there's a hidden, predictable path that connects the two?
I mean, on the surface, the line seems crystal clear, right? You've got romance, which is all about mutual, consensual, and welcome feelings, and then you have harassment, which is the complete opposite: coercive, unwelcome, and unwanted. They really do feel like they're from two different universes.
But, and this is the big question we're tackling today, what if that hard line is actually more of a slippery slope? What happens when a welcome relationship ends and suddenly you're in a situation that feels, well, pretty unwelcome? Is it possible that one can actually create the perfect conditions for the other?
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the two main types of office romance, then introduce a key psychological idea called the affective bridge. We'll walk through 3 real-world breakup scenarios, look at a pretty unique solution called contracts for Cupid, and then wrap up with a new way to look at the workplace.
Okay, so first things first. We have to understand that not all office romances are the same. The power dynamic between the people involved is absolutely critical, and it splits them into 2 very different categories.
On one hand, you have a lateral romance. This is between 2 peers, people on the same level. On the other hand, you've got a hierarchical romance. This is between employees of different status, like a boss and their direct report. And research shows that coworkers tend to view these hierarchical relationships way more negatively. That power imbalance, that is the crucial ingredient in this whole story. And that power imbalance brings us to the core idea of this whole explainer. It's the psychological theory that connects a soured romance to a formal harassment complaint. Researchers call it the affective bridge. And honestly, it's the key to understanding this whole issue in a completely new way.
So how does this so-called bridge actually work? Well, it's basically a 5-step chain reaction. Step 1, a hierarchical romance ends. Step 2, one or both people are left with what psychologists call negative affect, bitterness, anger, resentment. Step 3, forced interaction. Unlike a normal breakup where you can get some space, here you have to see and talk to that person every single day. Step 4, that forced contact acts like a pressure cooker. It just intensifies all those bad feelings. And all of that leads to Step 5. The environment becomes ripe for harassment, and the risk of a complaint just skyrockets. The researchers who came up with this, Pierce and Agwaniz, they put it perfectly. They said these dissolved, direct reporting hierarchical liaisons are the crux of the link. So it's not just any office fling. It's this very specific high-stakes breakup between a manager and their employee that creates the biggest risk. Okay, so that's the theory of the affective bridge. But what does it actually look like when it plays out in the real world? Let's dig into 3 common scenarios that can pop up after one of these hierarchical breakups. First up, you have the revenge complaint. In this case, the supervisor is the one who ends the romance. The subordinate, feeling scorned, then files a harassment complaint. The research suggests this is especially likely if the subordinate got into the relationship hoping for things like a promotion or a raise. Motives that, of course, vanished when the relationship did.
Scenario 2 is basically the reverse. Let's call it coercive rekindling. Here, the subordinate ends the relationship, but the supervisor just can't let it go. So the supervisor starts using their position of power to make unwelcome attempts to get back together. And that right there is a textbook case of sexual harassment. And the third common scenario is discriminatory retaliation. Here, to avoid all the awkwardness and bad feelings after the breakup, a manager just relocates or even fires their former partner. Using your managerial power to solve a personal problem like that can easily be seen as discriminatory harassment, especially since the data shows it's usually the subordinate who ends up losing their job.
Okay, so we've established this clear, psychologically predictable path from a specific kind of romance to a potential harassment claim. So the next logical question is, what on earth can companies do about it? And this brings us to a really proactive, though maybe a little unconventional, solution.
Now, the knee-jerk reaction for most organizations is just to ban these relationships outright. But let's be real, that's often not very effective. These things still happen. They just go underground. And forcing them into secrecy only makes a potential breakup even messier and harder for everyone to deal with. So instead of trying to forbid it, some researchers suggest being proactive with something called a romance contract. It's exactly what it sounds like, a written agreement signed by both people that lays out the terms of a breakup before it even happens.
For instance, it might say that if things end, one person agrees to transfer to a different department. This gets ahead of that whole forced interaction problem. It's an approach that acknowledges human nature instead of ignoring it, and it creates clarity while protecting both the individuals and the company.
So let's zoom out and bring this all together. What's the big picture lesson here? How should this information change how we think about our own workplaces?
I think the most important thing to take away is this. The journey from a consensual romance to a harassment complaint isn't some random, unpredictable event. It's a real, psychologically predictable process. That affective bridge, built from bad feelings and supercharged by forced daily contact, it's a pattern we can actually recognize, not just some bolt from the blue.
And that leaves all of us with a pretty powerful question to think about. Now that we know this link exists, now that we know a specific type of relationship can become the breeding ground for harassment, how does that change things? How should we rethink our policies, our training, maybe even our own personal boundaries to face this reality and ultimately build a workplace that's safer and fairer for everybody?